The first day in a new office always carries a strange mixture of anticipation and anxiety. As I stepped through the glass doors of the sleek corporate building, I felt my heartbeat quicken, not entirely from nervousness, but also from the subtle excitement of starting something unknown. The lobby was bright and modern, polished floors reflecting the early morning sunlight streaming in through the towering windows. Receptionists moved with practiced efficiency, phones ringing softly, keyboards clicking, every sound contributing to the rhythm of a place that felt alive with purpose. I adjusted the strap on my laptop bag and took a deep breath, reminding myself to stay confident. Today, I was stepping into not just a new job, but a new environment filled with unfamiliar faces, hierarchies, and unwritten rules. My boss had briefed me about the office dynamics, and even casually mentioned a few of his friends who occasionally visited. At the time, I hadn't given it much thought. But as I approached the main workspace, a figure caught my attention immediately. He was taller than most of the people around him, with an air of quiet confidence that made it impossible to ignore. His presence wasn't loud or flashy, yet it radiated authority and charm simultaneously. Dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, he moved with an effortless grace, carrying a briefcase and a demeanor that suggested he belonged in rooms much larger than this office. He was my boss's friend, a fact I knew only vaguely until that moment. And yet, there was something inexplicably magnetic about him, something in the way he observed his surroundings, aware of every detail, yet seemingly unbothered by them. Our first encounter was brief and polite. As I walked past, he glanced in my direction, offering a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was nothing overt, yet it lingered longer in my mind than any formal greeting ever could. My boss appeared shortly after, introducing us formally, but by then, the initial impression had already taken root. The room seemed smaller somehow, the ordinary sounds of typing and shuffling papers fading into the background as my attention unconsciously returned to him. There was a moment of subtle tension, a faint but unmistakable awareness that this wasn't going to be just another routine office relationship. Something about him suggested stories untold, conversations that lingered in the air like half-heard whispers. Even as we shook hands and exchanged the usual polite pleasantries, I felt the invisible pull of curiosity, the kind that made you want to uncover more, understand more, even before you had any right to. As I settled into my desk and organized my things, my mind kept wandering back to that brief encounter. The man was more than just my boss's friend. He was a mystery, a presence that demanded attention without even trying. And in that ordinary, seemingly mundane first day, a seed of intrigue had been planted, a secret, subtle yet powerful, that I would find myself thinking about long after the office lights dimmed and the day was over. The first encounter after introductions carried an unexpected weight. It was one thing to shake hands in the formal setting of my boss's office, but another entirely when the world of casual interaction slowly unfolded around us. Later that morning, as I walked toward the coffee machine to grab a quick cup, I found him already there, leaning slightly against the counter, the lines of his suit perfectly in place, his posture relaxed yet deliberate. It wasn't coincidence that our paths converged. The universe, it seemed, had decided to nudge us into proximity. As I approached, he glanced up from his phone and offered a smile that was neither forced nor entirely neutral. It carried subtle warmth, as if acknowledging something unspoken, a recognition of presence, a brief but potent understanding between two people. I felt my heartbeat quicken, not from fear, but from the peculiar mix of intrigue and curiosity that only happens when someone captures your attention in a way that feels unexplainable. I had met people before, sure, but there was a sense of gravity in his gaze, a depth that suggested stories and experiences far beyond the small snapshots he chose to reveal. "Coffee?" he asked, his voice calm, measured, with a timbre that hinted at confidence without arrogance. It was a simple question, the kind one would expect in casual office banter, yet delivered in such a way that it felt layered, meaningful in a way I couldn't yet articulate. I nodded, offering a polite smile, and for a moment, we were just two people standing side by side, reaching for sugar packets, the soft hum of the office around us fading into a distant murmur. The conversation started cautiously, small talk about the weather, the busy morning, the usual pleasantries. But even in its simplicity, there was an unspoken tension, a quiet electricity in the air. Our words were light, almost trivial, yet every glance, every subtle shift in posture conveyed more than we said aloud. I noticed the way he tilted his head slightly when listening, how his eyes seemed to track not just my words, but the emotions beneath them. It was rare to feel so observed and yet so seen, to have someone acknowledge both presence and nuance in such a quiet, deliberate manner. A laugh escaped me at some small, trivial comment he made, soft but genuine. He chuckled in return, a warm, easy sound that lingered just slightly longer than necessary. There was comfort in it, a strange reassurance that made the atmosphere intimate without being inappropriate. And in that fleeting moment, I sensed the subtle pull of curiosity turning into something stronger, a fascination I didn't expect, yet couldn't deny. Before either of us realized it, several minutes had passed. The coffee, initially the reason for our meeting, became almost irrelevant. What mattered was the unspoken exchange of attention and interest, the small gestures and nuances that hinted at something hidden beneath the surface. Even as I walked back to my desk, glancing over my shoulder, I felt the invisible thread connecting us, tugging lightly but insistently at my thoughts. This first encounter, simple on the surface, had planted a seed, a quiet intrigue, a lingering curiosity, a secret that I couldn't yet name, but knew I would not be able to stop thinking about. By mid-morning, the office had settled into its usual rhythm, the low hum of computers, the occasional ring of phones, and the steady shuffle of papers. I found myself at my desk, trying to focus on my tasks, yet my thoughts kept drifting back to him. It wasn't just the initial intrigue or the magnetic presence he carried. It was something subtler, a pull that made even the most mundane interactions feel charged with unspoken possibilities. And then, as if the universe had decided to orchestrate another meeting, our paths crossed again, this time more deliberately. I was gathering documents to take to a meeting when he appeared near my desk, casually leaning against the edge, a small smile playing on his lips. There was no urgency in his movement, no pretense of purpose, just the ease of someone comfortable in their surroundings and aware of the effect they had on others. "Busy morning?" he asked, his voice smooth, carrying a relaxed familiarity that felt strangely intimate given our limited acquaintance. I looked up, momentarily startled, then smiled politely. "You could say that," I replied, trying to mask the flutter of nerves beneath the calm surface. There was a natural ease in the way he spoke, the subtle confidence in his posture, the faint warmth in his expression. It wasn't flirtation, at least not overtly, yet every nuance seemed designed to draw attention, to invite curiosity without demanding it. We started with small talk, questions about projects, comments about deadlines, and the usual office banter. But even within these trivial exchanges, there was a rhythm, a delicate dance of words and gestures that hinted at deeper layers beneath the surface. He listened with genuine interest, not merely nodding politely, but responding thoughtfully, asking questions that encouraged me to elaborate. It was rare to feel so heard, so acknowledged in a brief encounter. I found myself speaking more freely than usual, sharing thoughts and observations that I would normally keep to myself in a professional setting. At one point, our conversation shifted to lighter topics, the best coffee spots nearby, an upcoming office event, even a casual comment about the peculiarities of corporate culture. Laughter escaped easily, soft and unforced, weaving a thread of connection between us. There was an unexpected comfort in it, an ease that belied the formal hierarchies and boundaries of the workplace. Yet underneath that ease, I sensed a subtle tension, an undercurrent of curiosity and intrigue that neither of us acknowledged aloud. What struck me most was how effortlessly he balanced attention and distance. He was present, engaged, and yet retained an air of mystery, a quiet reserve that made every word and gesture feel significant. I noticed the way he maintained eye contact just long enough to create connection without crossing into discomfort, how his small smiles seemed tailored to make ordinary conversation feel intimate. By the time our brief interaction ended, I returned to my desk with a fluttering mind, replaying every word, every glance. It was more than casual conversation. It was the beginning of a subtle, unspoken bond, a connection that teased the boundaries between curiosity and fascination. I realized then that I couldn't stop thinking about him, about the moments of shared laughter and the quiet intrigue in his gaze. That morning, what seemed like a simple, casual conversation became a pivotal point, a spark that would linger, a secret I was just beginning to recognize, one that I knew would occupy my thoughts far longer than any professional interaction should. It was later in the day, after the initial flurry of tasks and meetings, that the moment came, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the air that I couldn't ignore. The office had quieted down. Most colleagues had returned to their workstations or stepped out for calls, leaving a rare pocket of calm. I was reviewing some reports at my desk when I noticed him standing nearby, idly glancing at files on a nearby shelf. He didn't approach directly, but there was an unmistakable weight to his presence, a quiet authority that seemed to make the room feel smaller, more intimate. Without warning, he leaned slightly closer and spoke in a voice just low enough for me to catch, a private whisper in the midst of the quiet office. "You've got an eye for details," he said, a hint of something unspoken hidden in the cadence of his words. My heart skipped a beat, not because of the compliment, but because of the way it felt personal, deliberate, as though he had glimpsed something in me that no one else had noticed. There was a secret wrapped in that simple statement, a subtle acknowledgement that hinted at a depth of awareness I hadn't anticipated. I tried to respond casually, nodding and murmuring thanks, yet I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more beneath the surface, more he wasn't saying. There was a tension in the air, a quiet electricity, the kind that exists in moments where words only skim the edges of meaning. Every subtle gesture, the tilt of his head, the faint crease in his brow, the slight narrowing of his eyes, seemed charged with intention, signaling that he was offering me a glimpse into something private, something dangerous, perhaps, yet irresistible. Even as he straightened and stepped back, the implication lingered. It was impossible to focus on my work, impossible not to replay his words and gestures in my mind, analyzing every detail for hidden meaning. The whisper had unlocked a flood of questions, a curiosity that refused to be ignored. Who was he really? What had he seen in me that made him speak that way? And most pressing of all, what was the secret he hinted at, the one I couldn't yet grasp but already felt the weight of? For the rest of the afternoon, the office buzzed around me, but my attention remained elsewhere. Every glance in his direction was charged. Every accidental brush of his presence felt like a message I wasn't quite ready to decode. I realized then that what had started as intrigue was evolving into fascination. The secret hinted at, veiled behind casual words and gestures, had a gravity I could not ignore. It wasn't merely curiosity. It was a slow, insistent pull that drew me in, demanding attention and thought, lingering in the corners of my mind like a shadow I couldn't shake. By the time I left the office that day, the seed had been planted. I walked to my car with a mind racing, replaying the encounter, analyzing every detail, every nuance. The secret he hinted at wasn't revealed, yet its presence was undeniable. It was a whisper in my consciousness, a subtle tension that made ordinary moments feel extraordinary. And even as the evening darkened, I knew one thing with certainty. I couldn't stop thinking about him, about the secret, and about the possibilities that lay hidden just out of reach. The office had transformed by evening. The steady hum of activity that defined the day had given way to a hushed quiet, interrupted only by the occasional ringing phone or the faint clatter of keyboard. Outside, the sun had begun its slow descent, casting long, golden shadows through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The warm light softened the edges of the office, giving the familiar space a dreamlike quality. It was in this rare, almost cinematic stillness that I realized how much the day had pulled me in unexpected directions, particularly in thoughts of him. My boss's friend, whose presence had lingered in my mind like a tantalizing puzzle I couldn't solve. I was reviewing some final reports at my desk, eyes skimming lines of data that blurred together as my thoughts wandered, when I sensed him nearby before I even saw him. He moved with quiet confidence through the empty office, a figure at ease in a space that suddenly felt charged with intimacy. Unlike earlier, when the day had been bustling with colleagues and distractions, now we were alone in this vast, dimly lit room. The shadows cast by the setting sun seemed to wrap around him, highlighting the contours of his face and the effortless poise of his posture. He paused near my desk, leaning slightly on the corner, hands casually folded in front of him. The faint glow from my monitor illuminated part of his face, revealing a hint of a smile that was both enigmatic and inviting. "Still here?" he asked, his voice low and smooth, carrying that same deliberate warmth that had captivated me earlier. It was a simple question, yet in the empty office, it felt layered with meaning. I looked up, startled for only a moment, and nodded. "Yes, just trying to finish up some work." My voice sounded unusually steady, though inside, my heartbeat raced. There was something different about this moment, more intimate, more charged than any casual interaction during the day. The office, usually a neutral backdrop for professional exchange, had become a stage, and we were the only actors. For a few minutes, we stood there in near silence. I caught myself noticing the small details, the way his eyes followed my movements with subtle attention, the faint crease of concentration between his brows, the rhythm of his breathing. Every gesture seemed meaningful, a silent conversation that existed beneath spoken words. The tension was palpable, a magnetic pull that made it impossible to focus entirely on work, impossible to ignore the electricity in the space between us. Finally, he spoke again, softer this time, almost a whisper. "It's rare to find someone who notices the little things," he said, eyes locking with mine. My stomach tightened, a fluttering mix of curiosity, excitement, and a strange, unspoken apprehension. The words hinted at the secret I couldn't stop thinking about, that subtle thread running through our interactions all day, a connection that was at once mysterious and compelling. As the evening shadows lengthened and the office grew darker, I realized how deeply the day's encounters had affected me. Alone in the quiet, every glance, every word, every nuance of his presence felt amplified. I packed up my things slowly, not wanting to leave, not wanting the moment to end. That evening, the office was more than a workplace. It was a canvas painted with tension, intrigue, and a secret I couldn't yet fully name. And as I finally stepped out into the cool night, I knew that thought of him, and of what remained unspoken between us, would accompany me long after the office lights had gone dark. It happened in the most ordinary of ways, yet the moment felt charged with an intensity that lingered long after it passed. I had been reaching for a folder on the corner of a low shelf, my fingers brushing against the smooth surface as I pulled it toward me. At the same time, he was moving in the same direction, his hand extending toward the same stack of files. Our hands collided briefly, a fleeting, accidental touch that sent a ripple of awareness through me. It was subtle, almost nothing, yet it felt like an electric current ran through that brief contact. The office around us, dimly lit and quiet, seemed to fade away. For a heartbeat, all that existed was the brush of skin against skin, the warmth of his hand lingering near mine. I withdrew, slightly, my heart racing, a flush creeping up my neck. It was impossible to look away, impossible to pretend that the sensation hadn't left a mark deeper than the physical touch itself. He looked at me then, his expression calm, yet there was a flicker in his eyes, something that conveyed awareness, a quiet acknowledgement of the connection, even in its accidental nature. "Sorry," he said softly, almost casually, yet the tone carried a subtle weight that made me wonder if he, too, had felt the impact of that fleeting contact. His voice was steady, measured, but underneath it hummed a restrained tension, the kind that draws attention and curiosity without ever forcing it. I managed a small smile, brushing off the moment verbally with a no. It's fine, though inwardly my thoughts were anything but fine. I could still feel the echo of that brief touch lingering on my skin, a reminder that something had shifted, however slightly. It was a silent communication, a wordless acknowledgement of proximity and presence, a tension that seemed to hum in the very air between us. The accidentalness of it made it all the more intriguing. It was a moment that could be dismissed as trivial, yet it carried an unmistakable intimacy that was impossible to ignore. As I straightened and returned to my desk, I caught myself glancing at him out of the corner of my eye. He had returned to his own work, seemingly unaffected, yet there was an unspoken understanding between us, a shared awareness of what had just passed. Every subsequent movement he made felt heightened, charged with possibility, and I found myself analyzing the smallest details, the tilt of his head, the slight narrowing of his eyes, the way he adjusted the cuff of his sleeve. Each gesture became loaded with meaning, each glance a question I wasn't sure I wanted answered. That evening, even after I'd left the office, my mind replayed the incident endlessly. The accidental touch was small, fleeting, almost insignificant in a literal sense, yet it had unlocked a flood of thoughts and feelings that refused to be ignored. It was more than curiosity. It was fascination, an awareness that this man, my boss's friend, had a presence that lingered, an effect that was impossible to dismiss. The secret I couldn't stop thinking about now felt tangible, like it was quietly weaving its way into every interaction, every glance, every fleeting moment we shared. It was late in the evening, and the office had thinned out to almost nothing. The soft hum of the air conditioning and the faint echo of footsteps were the only sounds that accompanied me as I made my way to the elevator. My mind was still replaying the day's encounters, the casual conversations, the fleeting touches, the whispered hints, all of it spinning together into a tapestry of intrigue and tension I couldn't escape. I pressed the elevator button, waiting as the doors slid open with their familiar mechanical whoosh, unaware that he would be stepping inside just moments later. When he entered, I almost didn't notice at first, distracted by my own swirling thoughts. Then I sensed him beside me, the space suddenly charged with an intensity that had been building all day. The elevator doors closed behind us, and for the first time since the morning, we were truly alone, confined in the small, metallic space with nothing but the soft hum of the elevator and the steady rhythm of our own breathing. We exchanged a brief, polite nod, but even in that simple gesture, there was a tension, a subtle electricity that neither of us acknowledged openly. I found myself acutely aware of the proximity of his body, the faint scent of his cologne, and the warmth radiating from him as the elevator descended. The confined space made every small movement feel amplified. Every shift of weight, every glance, every breath carried significance. It was impossible to ignore the silent conversation happening in the space between us. "I didn't expect anyone to be here this late," he said softly, his voice low and measured, carrying that same warmth and subtle authority that had captivated me all day. The words themselves were casual, almost banal, but the way he spoke them made it impossible to treat them as ordinary. There was a weight to the delivery, a quiet suggestion that our encounter was no accident, that the universe had somehow orchestrated this moment in its own deliberate way. I found my hands fidgeting slightly, brushing against my bag as I tried to ground myself, though the confined space made composure feel nearly impossible. I kept my eyes on the floor for a moment, then dared a glance at him. He was looking at me, not intently, not aggressively, but with a quiet awareness that seemed to pierce through the small armor I had constructed around myself. In that moment, the world outside the elevator ceased to exist. There was only the two of us, and the unspoken tension that hovered like a delicate thread, taut and electric. For a few seconds, silence stretched between us, long enough for me to feel the subtle pull of curiosity and attraction intertwining. Then, Almost imperceptibly, he shifted slightly, giving me space yet maintaining proximity, a delicate balance that made my pulse quicken. It was a dance of awareness, a careful navigation of boundaries that made every second feel heavy with unspoken meaning. When the elevator doors finally opened and we stepped onto the lobby floor, the spell broke, leaving me with a racing heart and a mind that refused to settle. That brief, intimate encounter, confined and private, had added another layer to the secret I couldn't stop thinking about. A tension, a pull, a curiosity that would linger far beyond the walls of the office. Alone in that elevator, I realized just how much the day had changed everything, and how impossible it would be to forget him or the invisible thread that connected us.